So this next session, I am really, really excited about. I know it's going to be very good. I am here with a true powerhouse in marketing and advertising overall, Brad Jakeman. Brad is a senior advisor at Boston Consulting Group and is widely recognized as one of the top marketers in the world. With a career that has spanned fashion, financial services, entertainment, and consumer packaged goods. As president of Pepsi's Global Beverage Group, Brad was responsible for 10 of the company's $22 billion brands, and that's billion with a B. So he knows how to manage a budget. A longtime client-side user and observer of out-of-home, Brad has some salient observations about how CMOs are navigating the media landscape and what it means for those of us that are looking to provide them with media and technology solutions. And he knows a lot about out-of-home. So please join me in welcoming Brad Jakeman to the virtual stage.
Hey, Anna. Wow, you're going to get a job as my publicist. What an amazing introduction. Thank you. Great to be here.
It could have been all 20 minutes that we have if I had that time, because you have a really, really, really good resume. But yeah, I mean, I did my best. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. Look, we had a really, really good prep call a couple of weeks ago, so I know that you have a lot of interesting points to get across. I'm going to try and be as effective as I can in this conversation to make sure that the audience gets to hear all of your wisdom. So let's start with the CMO position. You have a very unique view of the current role and the challenges for today's CMOs. I mean, you've been a CMO for a long time. So what does it mean to be a CMO today, and how would you define the role right now, and how has it changed in the last 12 to 18 months?
It's a great question. And we at Boston Consulting Group work with a lot of CMOs. As you say, Anna, I have worked in marketing for the majority of my career, and I have seen kind of the role of the CMO transition more, I would say, in the last 2 to 3 years than I have in the 25 years that I've been doing this. The CMO is one of the most exciting jobs in the C-suite. It's also one of the most treacherous jobs in the C-suite. Spencer Stewart, as you probably know, publish a report every year on what the average tenure is of the CMO. And it's actually dropped by 2 months to 20 months over the course of the last 12 months. And I think that's because the role has just become so much more complex. And that, I actually think that's why it's become more exciting as well. The CMO, and we're also seeing a lot of companies doing away with the title of CMO altogether in favor of things like the Chief Customer Officer or the Chief Growth Officer. The CMO now is at the center of the growth engine of the company. And what I often refer to today's CMO as is the Chief Collaboration Officer, because she now has to work across the entire C-suite to deliver the growth agenda. I would say that the CMO now has more responsibility for collaboration across the C-suite than almost any other C-suite executive, with perhaps the exception of the CHRO. But she has to be working with the CFO on driving the financial algorithm that will power growth. She has to work with the CHRO to make sure she has the right capabilities in place. She has to be working with the Chief Operations Officer and the Chief Digital Officer if there's one. So it's an incredibly complex job. One could argue it's bigger than one person. But it's also a very exciting job and an increasingly more important job.
Well, Brett, first of all, I don't know if you guys noticed who are listening in, but I certainly did. You kept calling the CMO, or all the leaders actually, she, and that's actually how you and I got to know each other to begin with. Is Brad is an amazing proponent of female leadership, and I love that you just took into, the CMO is a woman, and so is the leadership. So thank you for that, Brad.
It's the default pronoun.
Yeah, totally. It's really good. So the role has really changed and become more complex and also more important. If you put that in a perspective, thinking about out of home as a platform, how can these changes help our platform grow? What role could out of home play in that new?
We talked about the internal complexity that CMOs have to navigate. The external complexity is probably even greater, I think, because you have this explosion of channels that are available to you to communicate and or create a consumer experience through. In my day, back when I first got into marketing, you had to get your television right and maybe your print media right and a little bit of out of home and radio, but that was pretty much it. Now you have to manage digital channels, social channels, your own owned channels, and the complexity externally is very hard. And I think with out of home, I, as you know, am a huge advocate for out of home. I think it is an incredible media that has tangibility to it, has huge opportunities for contextualization, but is particularly in this country, certainly relative to where I'm from in Australia and also in some of the countries in Western Europe, I think very underleveraged because I think that it isn't necessarily the tip of the spear through the creative process. And it really can be for a lot of brands, particularly brands that don't themselves have a physical way to experience them, digital brands, DTC brands, and so on and so forth. Out of home can bring kind of a tangibility to your brand if it's executed very well. And specifically to your question about CMOs, we hear this all the time about out of home. It's really hard to measure, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And look, I think everything, well, number one, everything's really hard to measure because everything works in the context of other things. So you're not only measuring the individual impact, but the collective impact of your marketing channels and messages. But I think with out of home and measurement, it is, I think sometimes perfect gets in the way of good. And I think that if we focus less on the perfect and more on the good, I think we can build the metrics that are necessary to give us confidence that out of home is working as a media.
I love that. So when one hear that out of home is hard to measure, that is not true.
I haven't found that. So where I leveraged out of home the most is when I was head of advertising at Citigroup, and we spent a significant amount of our budget on out of home. So I'll tell you this, if a bank can feel comfortable with the metrics around out of home, almost any advertiser could.
Well, that is true. Certainly agree with that. So you've already said it. I've said it. You really, really like out of home. What's so great about it? And how does out of home get further upstream in conversations about integrated and omni-channel media? We really would love for out of home not to be seen as an afterthought or something that you're buying on the side, but rather part of the overall media mix. So why is it so great, and how do we make that happen?
So I think out of home is great because, as I said, there's a physicality to it. And if you're a digital brand, for instance, it kind of brings your brand into the kind of physical world, number one. Number two, there's great context around it. And if at Citi, we used to, if you take outdoor billboards, for instance, we used to literally sit down and plot where they were geographically, what they were next to, what they were around, what area or suburb or highway they were on. And we would actually create individual pieces of creative that acknowledged that context. And that meant that the engagement level was so much higher and the creative was so much more impactful. And so I think out of home really enables you to do that very well. And it's also part of, I mean, the thing that we talk about as marketers a lot now is how we're creating this kind of customer journey and customer experience. And again, the physicality of out of home can really add exponentially to that. And to your question of how could it be leveraged more, I would take a leaf out of the book of people like Facebook and Twitter, where they actually made a concerted effort to come into the content creators, whether they be advertising agencies or other content creators, and helped inspire and educate the creative teams on best practices around out of home. How can it be leveraged most effectively, creatively, and obviously from a business building perspective. And that really worked for Facebook and Twitter in the very early days. That's how they ended up getting a lot of people kind of executing for that channel, rather than as kind of a lot of creatives are trained in this country in particular to start with television.
Mm. That's actually, that's something we talked about in our prep call that I thought was fascinating. When and I'm talking about sort of selling out of home, we're talking a lot about the wide reach that our medium can provide, that, we can provide a wider reach than probably even Facebook or broadcast television, because we're everywhere. You seemed less interested in that. You really want to talk about the fact that out of home can be incredibly personal, and you should leverage the strategy in different locations, and you talked a little bit about can you elaborate on that? Because I think that's a very different perspective. It's super true and interesting.
So I think one of the things, irrespective of channel, what our industry has to get away from is this notion that we can apply whatever crap we want simply because we write a check to impose our message on top of content that consumers actually want to go to. And advertising, a great friend of mine once said, people hate advertising in general, but love advertising in particular. And what he meant by that is when you say to people, do you love advertising? They go, no way, I hate it. It interrupts my day. It's like, but if you say, name your favorite ad you've seen, whether it's out of home, television, whatever, almost everybody can do that. And so there's no need that advertising has to be pollution. And I think with out of home, that burden is even greater because you're existing in people's neighborhoods, you're intercepting them as they're living their day to day. So I think the burden of out of home is even greater than perhaps it is for television or digital and so on, because you have to be accretive to the experience as people are navigating their day. Great example that I use all the time is gas station TV. Here I am filling up my car. I've got nothing better to do. You have me as a captive audience. Why are 95% of the ads on gas station TV not acknowledging what I'm doing? Why are they just like an ad that I might see interrupt my digital experience on YouTube or on television? And why aren't advertisers really leaning into my mindset as I'm doing that? You know exactly where I am. I'm in a gas station. You know exactly what I'm doing. I'm filling up my car. Why isn't the creative acknowledging and engaging me within that context, and that way garner my attention more, bring me in, because I have nothing better to do? But I'm always fascinated, and I don't mean to pick on gas station TV in particular because I love that media. I just think it's underleveraged by advertisers who don't acknowledge the context and try and get into my frame of mind as a consumer of the content to leverage that.
Well, that's interesting. And again, I think I love gas station TV too. And I think they're doing an amazing job, and they're really, forward looking when it comes to content, and maybe they are doing campaigns like this. But I agree with you. And especially in this day and age when we're moving away from cookies and when, contextual advertising becomes even more important. Our medium is the ultimate contextual medium, and we should use that because advertisers are going to have a very hard time to target in other forms of ways. So that's a really, really, really good point. So when out of home is done really well, in your opinion, what can it do?
When out of home is done really well, it can, I think it can be one of the most memorable channels through which to deliver your message. There is also, and again, we talk about out of home advertising as though it's a singular thing. As you know better than I, it ranges everything from 10-story billboards on Sunset Avenue to gas station TV and advertising on treadmills and so on and so forth. So I'm trying not to be too general in my comments, but it can bring this amazing ubiquity to your brand. it can have this kind of surround effect to your brand. As I've said before, it can talk to you in a moment and be therefore more personal, and make your brand feel closer to people because it acknowledges the context they're in, the mindset they're in, whatever they happen to be doing, if done right. And so I think out of home can be just incredible. I think you can get more engagement out of home, again, if done right, than you can from almost any other media. It's also not time constrained in some instances as well. I can consume a piece of advertising in out of home for as long as I want. It's not that it's necessarily cut off at a marker point. But again, I would also say the burden on out of home is probably even greater than most media in order to make sure that it's not pollution. Advertising in out of home should make our communities better, more inspired, more creative, more useful. It shouldn't be polluting them. And I think the burden of that is on advertisers and brands to just make amazing, relevant, inspiring content.
Yeah, and take from your example on Facebook and Twitter, make sure that they work closely with their creatives to create these campaigns so they're good fit for wherever the ad actually ends up running. So you are an expert. You've already touched upon it, but I would like a little bit of a pitch from you here, or words of advice. You are a very skilled marketer. So for me personally, and for our members out there, how should we be marketing out of home as a medium?
So I think there is an opportunity to reinvigorate out of home. I mean, you have the benefit of the burden of being one of the oldest forms of oldest channels in general, some aspects of out of home. That is a burden in some respect because are you viewed as sexy as digital and so on? Who knows? But it can also be a benefit because there are a lot of amazing success stories for brands that have built themselves in out of home. I mean, I recall brands like Absolute that had incredible, and I would say that's a brand that used out of home and print as the tip of the spear of their advertising. So I think there is a big opportunity for the industry, the out of home industry, to re-inspire marketers and re-inspire creatives with the power of the media by showing incredible case studies that are inspiring creatively, but also have a growth story associated with them for marketers, to kind of really provide kind of best-in-class case studies, because we lack that as an industry more and more. I think we're exhausted by the number of channels that we have to execute in. We are confused at the interrelationship between those channels. We've already talked on ROI. Our expectation for precision often gets in the way of good, robust measurement because we get too obsessed with absolute precision. And so all of those things are opportunities for out of home. And to begin the dialogue around how inspiring and effective it can be as a media, I think would be welcomed by marketers and the creative community.
Thank you. That's very rich. That was very good. Or we just show them the video of this conversation.
Well, I don't know if they had that much influence.
Oh, this is very good. So one final question to close things out here. The theme of this conference is future-proof. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about our industry, and you kind of answered a little bit of that already, but how can the out-of-home industry future-proof itself? And how are you thinking about, your I guess now you're an advisor, but how are you thinking about future-proofing yourself, your knowledge, and the work that you're doing?
The answer to that is innovation, like really kind of lean into constantly innovating in the channel. As I said before, out of home is a very broad term. But if you think of it as a way to intercept and add value to consumers at all points along as they go through their life, and hopefully our lives will go back to being more outside the home and doing things other than sitting staring at Zoom screens all day. but innovate in there, find really interesting ways, lean into digital. I mean, the whole industry is also moving to digital, but think of really exciting and innovative ways to use out of home. Partner with brands and creative agencies and give them the challenge of inspiring the world with an amazing out-of-home idea, and then adjust the media to be able to execute on that. Do things working with brands and the creative community that actually innovates on the platform and pushes what you're capable of doing right now into something that hasn't been tried before. I mean, that's what I would recommend.
Brad, I can't thank you enough. That was fantastic and always so inspiring to hear you talk and give examples of what you've done in your amazing career. It was an honor to have you here. I hope I get to see you very soon again in person.
There needs to be martinis in our future.
Totally. I owe you a few after this one. Thank you so much, Brad.
And it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.